Hi, kids. Welcome to On the Marquee Deep Dive. This is a podcast where we're looking at films, using those films as a jumping off point to discuss issues present with the film, whether it be a main theme or I'm just pulling something out of the film I want to talk about. So today we're talking about Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining, and then we're using that to talk about alcoholism and alcohol abuse. I have some guests and some co-hosts with me here today. So Neil, you are a writer, journalist, the editor of the local paper, also a fan of the novel.
Yes.
So Neil is here to provide that perspective. We also have Andrew. Andrew is younger than the rest of us. He is a Gen Z.
Something like that.
Yeah,
I don't
something
know.
like that.
I
so
can
he
never.
will be the voice of his generation. He can tell us if the film.
That's a lot of responsibility.
He can tell us if the film still holds up to his generation, and can talk about alcohol abuse and how that sits with his generation. And then our guest is just going to be known as Michael. He will remain somewhat anonymous because he is a member of Alcohol Anonymous, so he can give that perspective on the film. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. And you're also an artist, so you can maybe speak to somewhat the reinterpretation of works of art by other artists.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You can't talk about The Shining without talking about reinterpretation.
Yeah,
You can't talk about Stanley Kubrick without talking about reinterpretation.
Yeah.
So let's start with, so it's based on Stephen King's novel. Is anyone, okay, obviously we know Neil has read the novel. Have anyone else here read the novel?
I don't know. I haven't.
Have you read any Stephen King?
Oh, yeah, Christine.
All right.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of Stephen King.
I think I spent the better part of my teens just reading Stephen King. Of all the authors, I've read more Stephen King than anyone else. There was a phase where I would read a Stephen King and then I would go watch the film. Are you a big reader, Andrew?
I am trying to get back into reading. It was something I used to do so much as a kid and kind of fell off. I don't know. Gen Z attention span kind of thing. But no, I'm trying to get back into it. But I actually haven't read a Stephen King novel. He's so highly regarded, but it's just never been on my radar. But I think I have to now.
All right. So this is King's third published novel. Any guess as to which number of adaptation this is? How many films were made into films before this one?
I didn't know there were any.
Well,
beside this one.
Carrie obviously came out before The Shining. Was Salem's Lot? Did it come out before this?
Yeah, so his first published novel was Carrie, which Brian De Palma adapted. So the first King book is the first King adaptation. And then next published was Salem's Lot, which Toby Hooper adapted for the 2-part TV movie.
Holy shit, Stephen King hit the trifecta
If
in
you
terms
think
of
about
directors.
No, his first 6, right? So then he gets the third one, Shining, Stanley Kubrick. And then there's David Cronenberg, does The Dead Zone.
Oh my God.
Wow. He really lucked out.
Yeah, and then he works with George A. Romero for Creepshow. Right, that's what it's called, right?
Yep.
And then we have, who am I missing? John Carpenter does Christine. So those are the first 6,
Pet
right?
Cemetery? Who did Pet
those
Cemetery?
Those are the first 6 Kubrick film adaptations, and he's got the Murderer's Row of horror film directors.
Wow. I hadn't realized how he had lucked out.
I think helps build his reputation as the master of horror, right?
Sure.
When you've got all these horror icons making your work right away, right out of the gate, he's golden from there. In fact, he's golden from Carrie. Once the film comes out, he gets $500,000 advance for his next novel.
But you know this as a reader of King, is that King's books are cinematic in scope, and they're so well structured that it's they divide quite neatly into 3 acts, and there's such a good flow to them that I think that's why those directors and those writers were attracted to King's work, because it was, wow, this isn't going to be a whole hell of a lot of work. Although I did read up on the background, right? King had a suggested screenplay, and that got thrown out by Kubrick.
So the manuscript comes to Warner Brothers, where Stanley Kubrick is under contract with, and Kubrick is under like a contract nobody else ever has. He can make whatever he wants. Warner Brothers will give him the money. He has no timetable, unlimited budget, final cut. He gets everything. So he can, then they're of the opinion that let the master, by this point, he has made 2001 Space Odyssey, he has made Doctor Strangelove, just let him do it, leave him alone, he'll come out with a masterpiece. So they have the manuscript for The Shining before it's even published. Kubrick had been looking since the early 60s to look and make a horror film. Not a huge fan of horror, though. I think actually in the 70s he was approached for directing The Exorcist and The Exorcist 2. But so he liked what he saw in the Shining manuscript. Warner Brothers bought it. He went on adapting it right away. So he's adapting it before the novel's even published, which tells you sort of, because I think it was published in, I wrote it down here, I want to say 76?
77?
77.
Okay.
77 it was published, and the film doesn't come out till 1980. So... so in adapting it, because Kubrick is not a horror fan, he contacts a woman by the name of Diane Johnson because she was giving a seminar on Gothic horror. So at first he just contacts her, wanting to know the trappings, the in and out, everything about horror, discuss horror with her, the tropes, everything. And then eventually he decides that he likes her point of view, and he hires her to help him write the screenplay. Yeah, Stephen King had submitted a screenplay. I've heard 2 different takes on what happened to that screenplay. One thing I heard was that I think what Diane Johnson says is that Kubrick never read it at all. The other take is that Kubrick read it, but he thought that it was just the book in screenplay form. Nothing changed, nothing removed, just exactly the same verbatim.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, it's like Neil says, right?
Yeah.
He's writing them in a cinematic way, so he probably just thought, this is good enough, right? And maybe it was.
Who knows? Yeah, maybe it was. I will say that what Kubrick does, he does this on the following film when he does Full Metal Jacket, is he likes the source material. He brings in someone who was a war correspondent in Vietnam, so someone who knows. And then, so what he does with Diane Johnson and what he does in Full Metal Jacket is first they just talk about the book. They just talk about it for a month. They spend a month talking before they write anything down. Then they key in on scenes that they want to be in the film, and they put those scenes next to each other and move things around and see what works and what doesn't, what they respond to. So part of the reason that Kubrick chooses to adapt things, because his first few films were written by himself, he realized that he was too close to the material to have an objective view. He'd rather have something that he didn't write so he could read it and see how he responds to it the first time. So from that point on, he always adapts novels. So so they work on it. And then basically the process was Diane Johnson would write the screenplay. She'd pass it to Kubrick. Kubrick would do a pass-over on it, pass it back to her, so on and so forth, until they had something that they're happy with, start production. And Kubrick is writing while they're shooting the entire time, Jack Nicholson says that he stopped looking at the script because the script would change before they started filming.
So
He
it
would
was
just
like
look at
so it was like Lord of the Rings,
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
right? Where Peter Jackson was like rewriting scenes that night, the day of.
Yeah, so Kubrick, that's part of the reason I think that we get so far from the source material is because Kubrick's take was different, but he also wanted more tension. So he engineers things for more tension in pretty much everything he does, and there's an auteur, so there's certain themes and things that he recognizes or wants to bring out or is fascinated with. But yeah, so King was not happy right from the get-go, wasn't happy with that his screenplay wasn't being used, wasn't happy when the casting was announced.
To Stephen King, I would have said in 1978 when work started on the film, and by this point his book The Shining is out in a raving success, I would say, have you looked at Stanley Kubrick's work? This is not right. Kubrick is not a literal filmmaker. You are going to get the Dr. Strangelove treatment.
Exactly.
To The Shining.
Dr. Strangelove was a serious look at it, but Kubrick couldn't help, when he was adapting it, trying to come up with reasons for motivations for things, not seeing how ridiculous and stupid they were, so he decided to steer into how ridiculous and stupid they were. But so castings announced. With most of Kubrick's films, he knows who he wants for the major players. He goes out and gets them. And then for the smaller parts, he has people send in tapes. Kubrick does not hold auditions. He does not leave his house generally. So he knew right away that he wanted Jack Nicholson. He had been eyeing Nicholson for quite some time. He had a continually being shelved project of Napoleon that he was looking at Nicholson for. And then he knew he wanted Shelley Duvall. King didn't feel like those two were right at all for the characters that he wrote.
Again, the cinematic, I think, side of Stephen King is, it would not surprise me to hear that he even wrote it with somebody in mind.
Do you know who he wanted for Jack?
No, I don't.
John Voight.
Oh, no.
Oh.
So his criticism was that Jack Nicholson...
That's not a horrible pick.
No.
His criticism was that the second Jack Nicholson shows up on screen, the audience is going to think this guy's crazy.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Which I don't know. Is that what you... Because... Yeah, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but he's not crazy in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He's a guy who gets caught with an underage girl and tries to get the easy way out.
Fair enough, but certainly by the time the late 70s rolls around, Jack Nicholson, in both his film work and his persona as Citizen Jack Nicholson, has already cultivated a persona of
but is that
an
a
easy
problem?
rider, if you will.
But is that a problem in Chinatown? Does Chinatown start and you think, oh, this guy's crazy?
No.
So I don't buy that criticism.
I hear you though, but certainly by the late 70s, Nicholson was regular tabloid fodder.
I would. You just hold on to that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest thing for another podcast. And Ken Kesey.
Yes, I know.
And,
I did a video on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and as soon as I got to the Ken Kesey, I was like, "Oh, this is right for conversation with Michael." And then Shelley Duvall, he thought that was too mousy.
Right.
In the novel, in the source material. Her character, Wendy, stands up to Jack more. She's more of a, I don't know how to say it without saying a strong woman. But Kubrick intentionally does that because towards the end of the film, when Jack is coming after them, there's more dramatic tension if we're scared for Wendy because we know she can't stand up to Jack.
I found her really right from the time that she talks to the doctor.
Yeah.
Right when Danny has that episode where he at the beginning of the movie, or a third of the way through, where he passes out. Right, he has a little episode, and the doctor comes in and says, "Well, when did this happen? When did this start?" thing, and they talked about Jack grabbing him and dislocating his shoulder.
Right,
and I saw right away she's like codependent. She's defending this guy. Right. Oh, and it was an accident. It was, and during that time, right, I was like, this is so familiar. This is familiar. This is really familiar.
Good, yeah. So that's one of the things that Diane Johnson and Kubrick talked about was, what kind of person is Jack? Is Jack a good person? What's their relationship with Wendy like? Is Wendy a good mom? What is the dynamic in the household? Because in the book, right, it's been a long time since I read the book, so you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, but I think in the book, Danny is more a daddy's boy than a mama's boy. And there's some animosity between the way that...
She's a career woman, right? She and so...
The dynamic is entirely different.
The dynamic is different. She's present, but she's certainly not as present as her son would like. And so this is kind of drives him towards his father. So it's like you say, it's in many ways it's a completely different character.
Yeah.
So in the book, she's because I haven't read the book. So in the book, she's a professional.
Yep.
Oh, so it's totally.
Yeah,
you're right. The other way around.
Basically, he takes the skeleton of it, and what he does all the time.
I can't remember what she does, but
something.
She makes her own money. She has her own career, and so because of that. Right, that's where Jack is. Okay, will you be the writer and you do you? I'll bring in the day-to-day money, you write and you help out a lot more and be an active parent with Danny.
Yeah, and I think that's where Kubrick changes it, right? So that if we're talking about alcoholism and the stressors on Jack, I think that's where I can see it present. Is now he's got a young family he's got to provide for. They go up to this hotel, and he's thinking, great, right? Now here's my opportunity. I'm going to write my blank, because it's never really stated. I think in the book, I think he finds the scrapbook, and he starts working on something from that. But in the film, I don't think it's ever really said what he's going to work on, right? You got ideas, nothing good yet.
But the show is a scrapbook on the table.
It does show it on the table, yeah. But I think that's the whole crux of it is, right, is he's got in his mind, this is going to be it. Finally, I'm clean. We're going to go up. There's going to be no temptations. I'm going to have all this time to just write, and I can finally write something. And then it doesn't happen, right? As we see in the film, it doesn't happen, which just, I think, just builds. And
Five months without a drink is not 5 months sober. Is not sober. You're not sober.
Yeah, and I think that's right, because I've seen people criticize that the portrayal of the alcoholism in the book or in the film opposed to the book, and that and the way he starts in so let's talk about the start of the movie, right? So the movie starts, and basically we have the scenes cutting back and forth between I don't know if you would say it's an interview, right?
Yeah.
It's more of a formality. And then Wendy and Danny at home. And I think those two things are juxtaposed. I can't talk. But they're
juxtaposed.
For a reason, right? Because we're seeing Jack, and then we're hearing about who Jack is. And I don't know how anyone else reads that scene, but I read that scene as, like I said, like he's going in there, not wanting to ruffle any feathers, right? They offer him coffee. Yeah, okay, if you have any. He's just agreeing with everything. He just wants to get this job and get there and do it, and he'll go along with anything. Even as much as to when they tell him, oh, by the way, 10 years ago, the last guy murdered his family. He tries to shrug it off.
And he said, oh, my family won't mind. They'll love it. They'll love it here. They'll love it.
And then we see his family.
That's typical.
right? And then we see his family, and I don't think, maybe that's the way I read it, but I don't think his family that matches what he's saying.
I
think they'll go along with it, but I don't think it's ideal for them.
No, it's not ideal, and it's not ideal in the book either.
Yeah.
But it's given in the book. Certainly, it's portrayed as far more that this is an opportunity for redemption and to reclaim the more traditional male role as provider, but Wendy wants to believe that her husband has turned a corner and wants to give him that opportunity to succeed and be a successful artist. And of course, then she sees, okay, and I'm going to take this opportunity to forge a better connection with my son.
Right.
I don't know. I see him as being just selfish. To me, he's being selfish.
From the outset, to me, I'm like, okay, he's got one thing in mind.
He just wants to write.
He just wants to write.
And that shows up in that scene where she comes in, and he's like, when you can fuck off right now, right? Like now you're still here. What are you doing here, right?
The book is more of a slow burn.
Yeah.
Where he's in the early days, it's like, okay, he's just doing the best he can.
Yeah.
Right. And that is very typical King, right? He doesn't want Darth Vader out of the gate, right? He doesn't like the straight evil out of the gate of his protagonist. He likes to do not a bait and switch, but a slow burn.
Well, I wonder, because first of all, you have a novel, and then you've only got 2.5 hours to develop these characters. So, maybe they're slow burn in the book, but in a movie, I think
you have to take concessions, right?
Yeah,
it can't be 3.5 hours of character
study.
It can. Yeah, and maybe it should have been
if you're Coppola.
And I think if we're talking about his issues with substance abuse, right? So that first scene, we get him talking about the job and everything, and then we get Wendy saying the story about what happened, and then he hasn't touched, that was it. He hasn't touched a drink in 5 months, right? She tells us that. He doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But he hasn't had a drink in 5 months is the setup, right? He hasn't had a drink in 5 months, and then it's look at all of these things, these stressors that are happening. You can probably speak to this better, Michael. But as far as we know, also, he has nothing else to rely on, right? He just stopped cold, which perhaps is not the best thing.
No, it's not the best thing. Well, it depends. Different things for different people. For me, I had to stop cold, but I had a ton of support.
Right.
And he doesn't.
It doesn't seem like he has a lot.
I've done what he's done. I went up to northwestern Ontario, and I was in a mobile home, and there was no liquor. I had left Toronto on a one-way ticket to Winnipeg. I ended up in Winnipeg, no place to live. I phoned my uncle. He put me up in a mobile home in late winter, January, February, March, and to this day, I can't drink the instant coffee, the General Foods coffees of the world stuff.
You can't drink Sanka.
Well, I can drink Sanka, but I can't drink that instant coffee, that flavored instant coffee, because it reminds me of when I was
triggers
and
you.
I'm like, I was detoxing. That's what it was. So he's detoxing, and he's got there's some heavy stuff going on. Like when I first thought of, when you approached me about this, The Shining, I'm like, The Shining. Okay. So, and then rewatching.
'Cause you're not a horror fan.
No, I'm not a horror fan at all. And I'm rewatching the movie, and I'm like, and then when I looked at it through the lens of an alcoholic, I was like, okay, yeah, all right, I see that. I see these things, that are familiar, vaguely familiar, but when he's having a sip of bourbon, even at 20 years sober, I could feel that bourbon in the back of my throat going down. It felt so good, right? So even though he's imagining that, it's very real for him in some sort of post-acute withdrawal kind of way, right? Yeah. But
Yeah. So, Andrew,
Mm-hmm.
you had never seen it before until last night.
Right. I watched it last night. It was my homework.
Okay, so what did you know about it though before you watched it?
I didn't really know anything. I had seen the few kind of picturesque scenes, the hallway full of blood, the bloody the bloody
All the
twins, right?
picturesque scenes are all Kubrick contrived scenes.
But that was it. That was really all I knew. And, going into it, I was pretty much blind. But it was really interesting to kind of keep the frame of mind that I'm trying to kind of think about it in this addiction, alcoholism kind of way. Because I think watching the movie normally, you may not pick up on it right away. But it's so obvious right from the beginning that there's something deeper here. It's not just a simple story, right? There's more to it. And it's almost like...
Do you think?
It's
but
right
do
there.
you think that he's crazy right from the go? Like, does he read to you as crazy from the start?
If I didn't understand sort of the background, then I would think, because right away I thought, oh, yeah, maybe he's. Maybe not. I don't think it happened. It didn't happen that fast at the beginning of the movie. He's just a guy that wants a job and he can't be a teacher. And then I'm like, why can't he be a teacher? I wonder what happened there.
There's more about that in the book, right?
Absolutely,
Okay.
because again, this is a standard King thing. His characters are damaged goods, and can they rise above their damage or not? Is really the tension, I would say, certainly in all of the King books I've read. And even he writes children so well, and even the kids have had some trauma, and can they arise above their trauma?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we said, but King had issues with alcohol abuse, and then later on other substances, but that was part of write what you know. And this is, as you've said earlier, this is probably of his first 3 books. This is the most of what he knows.
It's personal and it's cathartic. He was trying to get a lot out.
Yeah.
And I think that was also part of his disappointment. This wasn't a film about Stephen King's inner demons, because certainly that's what he was writing about.
Right. Mm-hmm. And as far as, just because he's a good author doesn't necessarily mean he's a good film. Has anyone seen Maximum Overdrive? he directed a film. It didn't turn out too well. So take his criticisms, I guess, with a grain of salt. I know there's Stephen King fans that will defend, right? They'll take what he says and defend it.
Yeah,
Ride or die King fans.
King's material is much better cinematically in the hands of real directors. There's no question. Sorry.
Well, there's that thing about an artist we talked about before. Before the episode here, there's artist trying something different, right? A rendition of it, like he was trying to do something different as an artist, and kudos to him, but it didn't work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But Andrew, you were talking more, and I'd like to hear this more as someone again who kind of jumped into this. I've been familiar with this material now for like 30 odd years,
right?
So, 40 years, I guess. So yeah.
No, I would love to read the book after watching the movie. I feel like there's a lot more there. On a surface level, it's a pretty simple story, right? And the movie really does a good job of showing you what you need to see. There's nothing else there, really, right? So I'm sure the book fleshing out on that stuff would be great to read. It's even just from the start, right? I'm sure there must be more that we don't see at the beginning of the movie that, either it's backstory or how he lands the job or whatever it may be that's fleshed out that would be interesting to read about, I think.
Yeah, now I almost don't want to spoil the book for you by discussing any of those things.
See, to me, I'm like, why would you read the book? You know how it's going to end.
Well, that's the thing that I see people all the time talking about when they appoint themselves film critics and they criticize movies. Well, it didn't do anything to the plot. The plot isn't everything.
No.
If the plot was everything, I could tell you what happens in the movie and then you don't have to go watch it. It's a visual medium.
Right.
Yeah. Nuances, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's one other scene that I wanted to bring up in regards to alcoholism, because when I'm watching the film for that purposes, there could be an interpretation, and that is when Jack finally goes into room 237, he's greeted by a beautiful naked woman who turns out not to be the beautiful naked woman that he was expecting. And I can't help seeing that as this is alcohol. I don't know if that's what it's intended.
Well, no, that's a good analogy, right? Because like at first it works. At first it's wonderful and it's beautiful and you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof and you can dance the night away, or you think you can, and it takes away your pain and it makes you, or me, I can only speak for myself, it made me sociable, it made me, and then it didn't, and then I became the monster, and then it didn't work anymore at all it did was it didn't take away the pain, it just created more pain. So but that thing about, oh well, I just have a drink, I'll just mellow out, have a drink, and then it just, and I can't have, I mean, one is too many and 100 is not enough.
Yeah.
Terrence, do you think that was Kubrick's way of visually trying to depict temptation? Right? How do you visually show temptation?
I'm not sure what Kubrick's intentions were, but I will say that he finally gives in. He goes to the gold room. He has a drink. Wendy comes up and interrupts him. He goes up, and then we see that scene unfold. And then when he returns, he denies it happening, right?
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way.
That's exactly how it plays
until
out.
you mentioned
I
it,
don't
and
know
then
what
looking
Kubrick
at it, right?
intended by that, and there's lots of people that'll pull apart the film and see whatever the hell they want.
I mean, it's a good analogy. I think it's a great analogy. I didn't think of it until you just mentioned it. But when the line that really struck me is like, I haven't had a drink in, he says something about the 5 months of utter devastation that it caused me.
Right.
Yes, 5 years of not having a drink. 5 months of not having a drink. And the utter devastation that it had caused me. That's so familiar.
And he finally unloads some of the resentment, right? And he talks about having to work the menial jobs and everything. And I think he expresses what I was talking about, right? It's like he sees this as his ticket out, and you're all fucking it up for him. Yeah. But it's not, right? It's him.
It always is.
The ghosts, the demons, are his.
Yeah, it's classic. Running away, right? Right away, change. We call it the geographical cure. So right away, he's taken the geographical cure. He's got nothing left. He's probably burnt all his bridges. We don't know this. I don't know. Does it speak to it in the book? He's burnt his bridges. He's got nothing to rely on. And now he's got to go somewhere and find something. And this is perfect because there'll be no alcohol there. I'll be by myself, nobody to bother me. And I can finally try and do this thing that I think that, he's probably not even a gifted writer at all. He just thinks he is. The delusions of grandeur.
The tension of Jack's character in the book is that the further he descends, you still have this glimmer of hope. Maybe hence the title, The Shining, right?
Mm-hmm.
That somehow the light at the end of the tunnel.
Do you know where he got the
I
title?
don't.
So Stephen King got the title from Instant Karma. We all shine on.
Oh,
John sings.
There we go. Is that as a reader you feel, and this is King's talent, as a writer you feel viscerally, the train is bearing down on you, but you can't stop hoping that light is not the train bearing down on you. It is the light. It is the light at the end of the tunnel. up until the very end, you, as a reader, you're rooting for Jack to come out of it, that because he just drops enough breadcrumbs to keep you hopeful.
Right, and in the novel, it's more he's possessed by the hotel, not necessarily driven mad.
And
as
Kubrick
he is
was
in the film.
not interested in that at all.
No, Kubrick is not someone who really. I mean, that's what attracted him to the book itself. But yeah, he does not usually entertain supernatural things that can't be explained.
I thought Danny was more possessed by the hotel than Jack.
Well, Danny, I think it's explained better in the book, maybe, right? It's I think in the book it's Danny's powers are energizing the hotel. It's fueling things. And I've seen people interpreting that Jack also has some of those repressed powers, which is also adding. But I think in the novel it's pretty much the hotel trying to get Jack to serve its needs, which to some effect, with Grady letting him out of the pantry and everything, happens in the film, but it's downplayed, right? And there's the visual metaphor that is constantly being going back to, which we only, I think, mention once or twice in the film and see once, and that's the boiler, which is the main reason they're there, right? Is the boiler. So as the book goes on, or especially towards the climax, the boiler is going, it's going. Just as Jack is, right? It's going to explode. I don't know if I should say any more about that right after that. The ending is different.
The ending is different.
Okay.
The ending's different. Maybe I'll read the book.
Yeah, I guess we got to read
I
the
probably
book.
won't.
So you know what you should do, though, because on the way here, Michael and I were talking. Michael was trying to talk about the movie, and I was like, save it. But you should watch Dr. Sleep. So Stephen King felt that there was things that he didn't address and he didn't publish this until fairly recently. So it was years and years after.
10 years
it was
or so, yeah.
the wondering of what
years.
happened to Danny, especially since in the book it's mentioned that Jack's father was also an alcoholic, I believe. So it's the cycle, like you mentioned, because Michael said on the way here that kid is going to be an alcoholic.
Right.
No.
Well,
I said I will be amazed if that kid doesn't turn out to be an alcoholic. So he's already predisposed, right?
Dr. Sleep is the continuation of The Shining. It's adult Danny now. So the book comes out, and then Mike Flanagan, who does Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, all of the Netflix horror movies that everybody has to watch, or series. He adapted Dr. Sleep into a film, and what I like is he attempts to do the impossible, and I think he pulls it off pretty well, is he makes it a sequel to both the book and the film. Have you seen Dr. Sleep?
I have not, and I've not read Dr. Sleep because I see, now I need to do both, because I avoided Dr. Sleep because I didn't want a sequel to The Shining.
See, that's the same thing when I heard about it. I'm like, I'm not reading that. And then I read a part of what the synopsis was, and it wasn't a good encapsulation of what the film is, because what I heard was, okay, well, now he's grown up and he uses his powers. He works as a care aide to help the elderly pass on. And I was like, yeah, I'm not really that interested. I've read Bag of Bones. I don't... what's the other one where his main character is an old person?
Yeah, and I mean, the problem when you're as prolific a writer as King is that, I mean, let's face it, he's Stephen King, in that, you know, whoever the publisher is would publish his grocery lists, and I would say, and in some cases, that's exactly what was published. It was the literary equivalent of the grocery list. It was
I think
half-baked material.
King's basically it's almost punk rock, right? It's warts and all. He writes it, and it seems like he doesn't like this is what comes out, and then because he writes so quickly, he's on to the next one already, right? He doesn't revise, edit, have it go back and forth with Diane Johnson until it's a lean machine, right?
Yeah. And so that's why you have these, pardon the pun, pun intended, shining moments in his career, of which The Shining, I would say, is certainly, if not his greatest novel, I would argue certainly top 3. I haven't read all of his work, but I would certainly say that of the genre, I would even say that's one of the greatest works of the 20th century. It is a fine example of the literary power of the horror genre. But that being said, is that he's had so many highs, but his lows are really low.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't remember for certain what the first Stephen King I read was. It might have been The Shining, but it's definitely the one that, like, when I first read it, I remember exactly where I was, where I lived, how old I was. Like, I remember reading The Shining, and it's one of the few books that I can say I remember exactly sitting in my bedroom on my bed reading the entire thing throughout.
Yeah, I have a similar experience. I remember the house. I remember where I was living. I was also a teenager. I definitely went through my Stephen King phase.
Is Stephen King teen fiction then? Because I would say, as I approached 20, I stopped reading as much, but maybe that's part of it. But I haven't revisited Stephen King since Cell?
I think what attracts, it's certainly what attracted me to Stephen King as a teenager is it feels very grown up, reading that kind of material. Like, oh, okay, I'm reading kind of a grown up book, and particularly if you read like The Stand, oh my God, you're reading like, you know, this 1,200 page epic.
You're reading War and Peace.
Look at me. I am the serious reader. And so certainly was there a bit of the pretentious 16-year-old kid right at George Eliot in Winfield wanting to, you know, pack around this brick of a book and look at me reading it? Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, even as a teenager, I realized that The Shining was absolutely something special, and it was something that I was able to go back to in my adulthood and read it and find it equally rewarding. As a teenager, I read it for the plot and for the scares. As an adult, I read it and went, "This is really, really fine literature."
Yeah, I think King has a thing that, I mean, part of the reason I read so many Kings was there was this comfort factor of you're looking before all these MCU and everything. There's certain tie-ins, there's certain connections between his book and Castle Rock being one of them, but there's always quite often the character is a writer. Quite often there's somebody with some sort of psychic abilities or ghosts. Quite often there is a religious zealot. Quite often there is the people you don't like with shit-eating grins. Like, there's all these Stephen King tropes of his own that are always present within the book. And it's sort of like, you know exactly what you're going to get when you get into Stephen King.
Which is why he has the fans, right? Mm-hmm. It's because you know what you're going to get. And you might not know all of the specifics, but you know you're in good hands because of that. I mean, it's, you know, Michael and I have talked music so many times, and it's like a new album of your favorite artist. Is at the end of the day, you're expecting, right, those touchstones, and so it's always a bit, when they go off into a new direction, and what are you doing? Can't you do more like what I like here? And Stephen King is always, some would consider that boring, but others would consider that staying true to
like
himself.
Comfort food
Is here's who I am, here's what I do, and like it or lump it.
Right.
And so that I think that might have also had something to do with the fact that he would have been so vocally opposed to what happened with The Shining, because, hey, no, this is not what I do.
Right. So before we finish, let's address the performances and the Stanley Kubrick of it all. So, Kubrick has a reputation of being many things: perfectionist, taskmaster. He has the reputation for multiple takes.
That's putting it lightly.
I think it gets misinterpreted by some that he's like a tyrant on set, or Stanley Kubrick is not a yeller. Stanley Kubrick has people he's worked with who return to work with him. So, for example, his third film, the film that really kind of put him on the map, The Killing, the star is Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden at that point was more of the bit player, not the lead on a film, so much so that United Artists, when they funded the film, were not willing to meet the budget demands that Kubrick wanted because they didn't have a leading man. So Sterling Hayden is the lead in The Killing. Then Kubrick casts him as, is it Major Kong in Doctor Strangelove. He comes first day on set, and he's got all of this technical dialogue stuff that he has to say, and he keeps messing it up, and he keeps messing it up, and he knows he's messing it up. And it's been some time since he worked with Stanley, and he's thinking, I'm going to get yelled at, I'm going to get fired. And Stanley Kubrick comes over to him and says, the fear I see in your eyes is exactly what we need for the character right now. So just keep doing whatever you can, and if I have to cut around it or do whatever I have to, I'll make it work. So he just keeps doing take and take and take and take. So Kubrick does a lot of takes. He's not a great communicator with actors because he will not tell you how he wants you to do it, but usually he hires you because he sees a way that you could do it. Ryan O'Neal, who stars in Barry Lyndon, said that Kubrick was the best teacher he ever thought or ever had, because Kubrick saw more in him than what he saw in himself. In regards to The Shining, Kubrick's approach was he wants that calm, cool, reserved Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall in the start. And he wants that freaking out, crazy, yelling Jack and screaming Shelley at the end. Which is why there's so many takes, because he's pushing them more and more and more. He wants to see what your limits are, and he wants to have that dynamic of the quiet and the loud. So, and as regards to the I will say urban legend of the however many takes of the bat scene, the crew says it's more like 32, which is average for Kubrick.
Of her swinging the bat?
Of her swinging the bat.
Yeah.
And there is a behind-the-scenes making-of documentary that Kubrick's oldest daughter, I think Vivian is her name, made during the filming of The Shining. You can watch it. Some of it is on YouTube. If you watch it, you'll be like, oh, yeah, no, this is not what's been presented. He's not yelling at Shelley at all. There's a part where Shelley's like, I think my hair's falling out. And he said, oh, everybody, look, Shelley's hair is falling out. There's disagreements with Shelley, but there's a part where so the scene in the bathroom, she's talking about the dialogue, and she's saying the dialogue's not working, that's why the scene's not working. And he says, Shelley, I don't care what the words are. The words aren't important. It's the emotion.
So let me give you a little pushback on that.
Okay, yes, please.
Can I say then that Stanley Kubrick was a passive-aggressive director? I
think Stanley Kubrick was not a good communicator.
He's not a people person.
He's not a people person. Once he has the clout too, he's filming usually at Pinewood Studios, where this is filmed, which is like a 20-minute drive from his home, and then he edits everything in his home. He does not have actors come to his house and audition. He does not meet anyone to audition. He does everything that he can from his home, and then he shoots it close to his home.
But
that sounds like a pretty good gig.
And I just bring this up because this is often the defense that is presented to artists who have treated people badly.
Right.
Is that they're not a good communicator. They're passive aggressive but bullying doesn't have to be yelling and screaming.
The other thing that gets lost in this is that Kubrick's a collaborator. So in all of his films, especially with, we'll say, A Clockwork Orange, for instance, he goes through the scenes and he rehearses and rehearses and rehearses with Malcolm McDowell. Malcolm McDowell, they try the scene, they try the scene, they try the scene, it's not working. He's open to your ideas. You can try it different ways. He's looking for different ways. Malcolm McDowell suggests, hey, what if I started singing and dancing? Kubrick says, okay, let's try that. We have Singing in the Rain, that scene in A Clockwork Orange, because of the collaboration between Kubrick. So he doesn't have a way that he wants you to do it. He wants to see what you're bringing. So, I mean, if that's mean, is making someone do multiple takes, like there's far worse directors. And there's also this thing that gets brought up is like, oh, Kubrick's on the spectrum because blah, 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 which I think is just total BS.
Yeah, no.
Just because somebody's smart,
I guess, I guess,
or has a reputation of being so.
I guess I just look at Kubrick, and I'm trying to see the making of the film in its time, where directors and the great directors were particularly hard on their female leads. Hitchcock was brutal. Right, is that there was a tendency for directors to be particularly cruel, frankly, to their female leads. And was Shelley Duvall a victim of that? I mean, all we have is a film to judge. I mean, yes, of course.
But Shelley Duvall will tell you that she wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's all that matters,
right?
really.
Shelley Duvall will downplay any of that, maybe downplay, but she'll say, no, that's not what the relationship was at all. And if you look at the behind-the-scenes footage, there's Shelley Duvall talking with Kubrick's daughters on set. There's families coming in and visiting the set. I've been going through the entirety of Kubrick's filmography on my channel, and just going through it, and everything is not drastically changed the way I see Kubrick, but it has changed what I see as a stereotypical view of Kubrick.
I just bring that up because Wendy is in The Shining, certainly compared to the book, is reduced to that, frankly, stereotypical, helpless, shrill female.
Right. There's a certain trope there.
And Kubrick, I haven't seen all of Kubrick's work, and I haven't seen The Killing, but certainly I would say before The Shining, did he have a female lead?
That's something, I'll accept. He does not even have a lot of female characters in his films. But I mean, it has not a question of him being a bad director. Maybe it's just him being misogynistic. Well, I don't know, because,
or has those traits. Right?
Sure, that would totally fit.
Maybe I don't know, because I mean, Kubrick he lives for the most of his life. He's secluded at home with his wife and his 3 daughters. And I think if you look at his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, while Nicole Kidman doesn't have the largest role, and you could argue that women are used somewhat as sex objects, I think the way that Kidman's character is written in that film is not the way that person would write that character.
Well, and from the little bit I know of that film is Nicole Stanley Kubrick gave Nicole Kidman the freedom with those multiple takes to keep working the character.
He does every time. He's open to interpretation on every single character. Nothing is set in stone. He's changing the script constantly. And, I mean, I don't know.
I'm not bringing this up to try and judge Stanley Kubrick with the 2023 lens. That's not what I'm after.
Come on, do it.
but it's just the man and the films have to be looked at in the times that they were made.
Here's the comparable, though, right? Yesterday was David Fincher's birthday. David Fincher is also known for excessive takes, making people walk through the same door 30 times because they're not doing it naturally. I think is a little more extreme than Kubrick just making you redo the scene again.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, did you find The Shining dated?
Yes,
no,
that's what I wanted to ask.
Not at all. No, I watched like 4K Blu-ray film scan. You wouldn't know that it was shot so long ago, right? It's right from the start.
It's aged well, is what you're saying.
Oh yeah, it's aged beautifully. Like it's you wouldn't even know that it's shot on a, because I assume they did most of it on a soundstage.
Yeah, so everything is a stage, except for some of the exterior shots
bits,
at the beginning, setting up.
Yep.
There's the stuff, of course, with the driving there twice, which there was so much of that helicopter footage that Ridley Scott uses it in the end of Blade Runner.
Oh.
Now that you know
Did
that, when
not
next
know
time you
that.
watch Blade Runner, you'll recognize it.
For it, yeah.
But yeah, everything is on a stage. I believe the Return of the Jedi was being shot on a stage beside them, and there was a fire.
Or would have been
Pinewood
Empire.
Studios.
Would have been Empire, because
Maybe-
Empire would have came out.
Yeah,
also
maybe
came
it was
out in 1980.
Empire. Yeah, but there was a fire that burned the set. And it's funny because I tried to look this up and find out more about it, but there was also a fire at Pinewood Studios in 2006. So everything I looked up was bringing about 2006.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care about 2006.
The reason I ask, Andrew, is just because Doctor Strangelove is my all-time favorite film.
Yeah.
If I was marooned on a desert island and could only have one film with me, it would be Doctor Strangelove. And to me, that movie is like absolutely timeless. And so that's why I asked about The Shining, because I have to admit I saw The Shining when I was 18 and I have not circled back.
No, I definitely think there's some merit to be seen that you could see that film made today and it would be the same. Like it, even down to the shots, some of the techniques he used, zooming in right on the face, you'd see that in a modern horror movie.
Let's
a whip
talk about
pan, like it's
Steadicam.
Steadicam too.
So Steadicam was invented, first used around 77, I think, when Rocky came out. There's the scene running up the stairs.
Yeah.
What is his name? I want to say Garrett Brown is the person who invented Steadicam. Kubrick, as he does, hired him as the cameraman in Steadicam. This is the film that utilizes Steadicam for the first time for what is really meant for. Kubrick is known for those long extended takes, but he weaves you through that hotel, the maze of the hotel.
That's funny. They didn't use a Steadicam, obviously, in the shots, the aerial shots. Yeah. Because I was like, wow, that's awfully shaky.
Yeah. You can even see the helicopter blades in the shots.
Yeah. I mean, I some of that, but watching the Danny ride his little big wheel through the trike through, even I was like, that's one long take. That's a long
I'm glad
take.
you brought that up, because that is the one thing that I remember when I saw The Shining as an 18-year-old that I was so annoyed about. It was one of the takeaways from the movie that I couldn't shake from the movie, is that in the book, I felt that the hotel was a real place, but the physical geography of the hotel in the movie is impossible.
But that is intentional, right?
Sure.
Kubrick wants you to feel like you are lost in the hotel as Jack is getting lost in the hotel.
So 18-year-old man,
I hated that.
I hate that. Right. Is like, of course, artistically that makes perfect sense. Well, but 18-year-old Neil,
you wouldn't have been thinking about it that way.
Who adored
he
the book,
ties it together
not.
in that scene when he's standing over the maze.
Yes.
Lost.
And the
They're
maze
lost
is again another visual contrivance of Kubrick. In the book, it's the topiaries, it's the hedge animals that come alive. Kubrick thought, well, there's there's no way we can bring that to life, so let's come up with something else. So he comes up with the maze instead.
I've read the book because I remember the topiary animals coming to life.
Do you?
So I've read the book. I remember that now that you mention it. I remember that. And the only way, there's no other book I've ever read where the topiary animals come to life.
And King finally gets his way in the mid-90s. There's the Shining TV movie version of it where it's more to his screenplay that he had written. And I remember watching that because I remember there was like these Stephen King television events. There was Storm of the Century and so on. And I found it boring.
Yeah, I read about it last night. After watching the movie, I was like, okay, I'll do some reading, and that the TV miniseries was just apparently just awful.
Yeah,
and that was him with some creative control. So it's what do you think, right? He hated.
And again, I'm watching it a fan of the book, and I just found it boring.
Right.
Because there's certain things you can do in a book that you cannot do in a film medium, right? Like him, right? A large chunks of the book is him going through that scrapbook and finding things and piecing things together, and we're inside Jack.
It's the book inside a book.
Right. So how do you visually represent that? Well, Kubrick decides you don't.
Yeah, Kubrick just literally makes a reference to it.
Here's the book on the side.
I'm going to throw
That's enough
out.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is this an accurate representation of alcoholism?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
So what does it get right and wrong?
Unless you look through, I think. If you're asked to look at it through that lens, yes, it is, right? Anybody who suffers or with active alcoholism, or anybody that's in recovery, will recognize a lot of the symptoms. Like, I'll recognize, like, I know right away, he's running away. Right? He's isolating. He's going through withdrawal. Like, for sure he's going through withdrawal. And he's imagining like drug-seeking behavior or alcohol-seeking behavior. He's like, as soon as he sits down, he's like, God, I just want a glass of beer. Just a glass of beer, right?
Right.
Well, that's bullshit. You don't want one. You don't, and he's like, looks around, and you can see him looking over the bar, seeing maybe they left one bottle or something.
Right.
Yeah. So there's that. But if I were to watch the movie, when I first watched the movie way back, it didn't even. And I was drinking pretty heavy back then, right? So. But it didn't. To me, it was a horror movie. But when I look at it through that lens, and I'm asked to look at it through that lens, yeah. But if you wanted to say this is a good representation of the disease of alcoholism, I'd say no.
So I wrote down some. I don't know if you want me to read out the ones I wrote down, or if you want to just say, we can do both. What you think would be a better representation of alcoholism?
I Am Bill W. It's a movie. Leaving Las Vegas.
Okay, that's one of the ones.
Yeah, Leaving Las Vegas.
Not, I think.
And you know, yeah, because I don't really look at movies in that way. Like,
but okay, here's the thing: if you would, right? So if you're watching Leaving Las Vegas, would you feel seen? Right? Would you be like, oh yeah, that's me? Like, and is that important to you in watching a movie?
No.
No. Would you?
No.
So would you watch a movie if so? There's a new film coming out in the theaters. Everybody's talking about it. It's about a guy starting AA. Is that something you? But oh yeah, I'm interested in that. Or would you not?
Well, yeah, I would be interested in it from a strictly historical sense, right? Like for me, and I can only speak like I want it to be like I can only speak for myself, right? I can't speak on behalf of Alcoholics Anonymous or any other alcoholics. I can only speak
to your experience,
to my experience, and that is like it's a huge part of my life. It's who I am. It's what I've done. It's and recovery for 20 years. It's just part of my life story, but it doesn't define. It doesn't define me as who I am.
Right.
It's just one little part of that whole thing. It's like I'm an artist. I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm an alcoholic. But having said that, it was important for me to point that out to people I love and I care about. For instance, my partner, I had to say to her, if you ever see me pick up a drink, you got to kick me out like now.
Right.
Because I will be like Jack. Not in the sense that I will kill anybody, although I might, you know. I mean, who knows? I've driven when I shouldn't be driving, but in the sense that I will destroy everything.
Right.
Like I will destroy everything, and I will destroy people's lives around me, and
with no regard.
With
right?
no regard.
Yeah.
With no.
So is The Shining a horror movie or a film about addiction? I guess in the same way that is Ray or I'm sorry, the Johnny Cash movie, is it just called Cash?
Ring of Fire.
Ring of Fire, duh, of course.
Yeah.
Right. Are those films about addiction or about music? And I would say yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would say
right
why
answer.
not? It can be both.
I would say that the success certainly of the book, and yes, I got to revisit the movie, is that it literally the eyes of the beholder can pull away strands of what they feel the film is about.
Yeah.
And to me that's the genius of Kubrick, is Dr. Strangelove an anti-war movie?
See, that's
yes,
what we were
but it's about other things too.
discussing on the way over. Michael said, why Kubrick? And I said, I like Kubrick's films because he doesn't ever tell you what to think, or he doesn't ever even give you a hint of what he thinks. He just presents it, and you can take from it whatever you want. He doesn't preach morals, basically, is what I like. Is this is his vision of the world, how he sees it, but he doesn't pass judgment on it. And he quite often will throw characters like Jack or Tom Cruise or whoever into situations where they're completely out of their element, out of their comfort zone, and that is the film. That is them just going through it.
I would say that is a central part of Kubrick, is taking people and throwing them out of their element to see what happens.
Yeah. So, I think that's about it, right? Anything else you want to say, Michael?
No, just what are the other, just quickly,
before
we have to wrap it up.
I wrote down probably most of these you haven't seen, but anyone listening might have. The World's End, Colossal, Nightmare Alley, and these are varying degrees of alcoholism in them. Bad Santa, A Star.
Bad Santa is an awesome movie.
A Star is Born. 28 Days.
28
Another
Days.
Round.
Star is Born.
One of my favorite parts of 28 Days is where the guy is bringing in. He's got his dead plant, and he's dragging the dog behind him. And he's like, I'm never going to get laid. Right? Because the plant is dead and the dog wants nothing to do with them, right? 28 Days is actually for a comedy.
Right.
I think it's a comedy.
It's lighter fare in general.
But it really hits a lot of. I wasn't going to mention 28 Days, and I thought, why not, right? Why not? Because life is not a veil of tears.
All right. Okay, so I think that's it for this one. All right, thank you for listening. This podcast was recorded in the Arts North podcast studio in Prince George, British Columbia. I'd like to thank my guest, Michael, and my co-panelists, Neil Godbout and Andrew Vogel. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to stay tuned for more. And if you're a movie fan, be sure to check out On the Marquee on YouTube.